Everyone thought it would be storms or sea monsters. But when disaster came to the Atlantic, it was quiet. No warning, no roar. Just a silence that stretched across the ocean like a sheet of glass. They called it the Great Pause. It started as a blip on the oceanographer's monitors. A slight drop in the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. AMOC. The world's conveyor belt, moving warm water north and cold water south, holding the climate together. A system as old as the Ice Age. One day, the currents just stalled. I'm Dr. Lena Mercer, lead investigator for the North Atlantic Shipping Consortium. I've spent my career chasing hurricanes, rogue waves, even pirate radio. But nothing prepared me for the day the sea stopped breathing. It was August. 23 ships disappeared in the space of 12 hours. Container vessels, cruise liners, even a Coast Guard cutter. Not a single distress call. No black boxes triggered. 1 second they were there, blips on radar, names in the shipping logs, and then nothing. I was called in with my team to analyze the data. The satellites showed a thin blue line curling through the mid-Atlantic, then breaking. The temperature gradients flattened. Buoy data read 0 drift. Not slow, not a fade, a wall. The ocean just paused. We launched search planes. Nothing. The ships had vanished. No oil slicks, no wreckage, just an unbroken silence, as if the Atlantic had swallowed its secrets whole. At first, the world panicked. Markets tumbled, ports closed, insurance companies scrambled. Every headline screamed about the missing ships. But after a week, the fear faded, replaced by resignation. People got used to the idea that 23 ships and hundreds of crew had simply been erased by the sea. But then, the radio transmissions started. It was 2:37 a.m. in the NOAA Command Center when the first message came in. Static, then a voice. Crackling, ancient, thick with salt. This is Captain Hugo Serrano of the Triton Star. We're adrift, no sun, no horizon, requesting immediate assistance. The Triton Star had disappeared 4 days earlier. But the voice wasn't right. The words slurred, vowels twisted, as if spoken by someone who hadn't seen land or language in centuries. We triangulated the signal. It came from the exact spot where the AMOC had collapsed. More calls followed. Crew, captains, even passengers, all sounding wrong. Hoarse, brittle, like their lungs had tasted too much time. I pulled the audio. Ran voice recognition. It matched, but the biometric markers, age, vocal strain, respiration, were all wrong. The crews sounded older. The first Coast Guard cutter to arrive on site found nothing but glassy water and a drifting life raft. Inside, a journal, pages yellowed, the ink run and fading. The last entry was dated 2023. The top corner was torn, but the final line chilled me. We see shapes under the hull at night. Something keeps whispering that it's almost morning, but the sun never comes. The world tried to move on, but the currents never restarted. Some said it was climate change, the ocean's slow revenge. Others whispered about time warps, quantum loops, portals to somewhere colder. All I knew was this: whatever had stopped the water, it didn't just erase the ships. It kept them. And then it brought them back, because 3 months after the pause, they found the crew of the Atlantic Promise washed up on a beach in Cornwall. Every sailor, every last one, looked like they'd aged 4 centuries. Teeth missing, hair gone, skin wrinkled and burnt, eyes deep with shadows no one could name. They didn't speak English anymore, barely spoke at all. But when I leaned in, one sailor gripped my arm with a strength that didn't fit his frail hands, and whispered in a voice dry as dust, "We never saw the sun again. We never saw the stars. The water just watched us." I filed my report, but I kept the tape, because I knew this was only the beginning. The ocean had stopped moving, and it was hungry for more. I never believed in sea legends, ghost ships, vanishing sailors. Those were stories for stormy nights and tired crews, not for scientists and rescue teams. But after the Atlantic Promise survivors washed ashore, nothing felt like science anymore. We brought them to a quarantine ward in London. Doctors ran every test, every scan. The results were impossible. Bone density that matched people 400 years old. Organs shriveled and brittle. Skin with a texture like driftwood and parchment. But their eyes, those were the worst. Pale, glazed, but wide open. Every time I entered the room, they followed me, silent and sharp. The language barrier was immediate. None of them spoke modern English. A few muttered Old Portuguese, Old Dutch, one even a dialect we trace back to 17th century sailors. It was as if the ocean had spat them out from the past, or aged them beyond reason. I tried to talk to them anyway. "Where did you go?" I asked, voice low. A man named Leandro, at least that's what we guessed from a tattoo on his ruined arm, stared at the window for a long time. Then he said, voice cracking, "No sky, no time, only waiting." Another survivor, a woman named Ruth, traced a circle on her hospital blanket, over and over. Her fingernails were black and cracked, but her motions were steady. I watched the pattern, a spiral, tight and endless. "Did you see the sun?" I pressed. She shook her head, then whispered, "Light underwater, never above. Only cold, only blue." I played the radio transmissions back for them. Most didn't react, but when Captain Serrano's voice echoed in the room, every survivor sat up at once. They spoke in unison. A phrase I didn't recognize, something old, something that tasted of salt and shipwreck. The interpreter looked pale. He whispered, "They're repeating a prayer for lost sailors, but the words are twisted, like they're meant for someone listening below, not above." I shivered. Outside, the currents remained still. Fishing boats hugged the coast, afraid to cross the silent blue. Satellites tracked strange temperature dips, a cold line snaking south like a scar. And every week, more oddities. Plastic debris washing up on beaches, warped and brittle as if it had spent centuries tumbling through a frozen abyss. A lifeboat from the missing ship Horizon's Edge turned up in Ireland, covered in barnacles, species nobody could identify. The world spun rumors, time holes, Bermuda Triangles. The ocean claiming what it was owed, but I kept thinking about the survivors. They never slept. Not really. Nurses said they just lay still, eyes open, whispering to someone only they could see. I sat with Leandro again, late one night. Storms rattled the windows, but inside it was cold and silent. "Did you see the other ships?" I asked. He smiled, lips cracked. "Not ships, just shadows, sometimes faces, sometimes." He stopped. I leaned in. "What did you see?" His eyes, sharp and terrified, met mine. "Something underneath," he whispered. "Something old. It spoke in the water. It said we could go, but it would keep the rest." The hair on my arms rose. "What does it want?" I asked. He closed his eyes. To be seen, to be remembered, to be heard again. The doctors took him away after that. His pulse spiked, his breath came ragged. He faded like a voice swallowed by the deep, but Ruth kept drawing her spiral. It grew, day by day, the circle tightening, the lines overlapping, until the shape looked less like a pattern and more like a whirlpool. Or an eye. One night, I fell asleep in the ward chair. I dreamed of standing on the deck of a lost ship, ocean glass smooth, no wind, no sun. A voice rose from the water. Not English, not human, but I understood every word. "You left us here. Now you remember?" I woke with salt on my lips. The world outside was still silent, but something was coming. I could feel the currents shifting, not in the water, but in the air, in every dream, in the eyes of those the ocean had returned. And I wondered, how many more would it keep, and how many would it send back just to warn the rest? By the end of that second week, the world was watching the Atlantic like it expected monsters to rise. But nothing happened. No new storms, no missing planes, just that glassy stretch of ocean that refused to move. The shipping lanes stayed empty. Cargo piled up in ports. Satellite images went viral, an unbroken, slick blue line, no ripples, no drift. But the silence was the loudest thing of all. I couldn't stop thinking about the survivors, how time had folded them up, left them wrinkled and ancient, how they whispered in languages nobody had used in centuries. Doctors ran every test they could imagine, brain scans, blood work, but Ruth's spiral only grew. Her fingernails eventually cut through the blanket. The lines she drew on the mattress pad stained red from the pressure, from the effort, from some unspoken pain. I tried to ask her what it meant. Why the spiral? She stared through me, eyes unfocused. "Water turns," she said. "Even when it stops, it remembers how..." But what was it remembering? Late one night, another survivor, Lucas, from a Brazilian cargo ship, started screaming in the ward. He pointed at the window, at the rain streaking down the glass. Olhos, eyes. Everyone came running. When I looked outside, I saw nothing but darkness. But I heard it. A hum. deep and low, almost a voice. The next morning, Lucas was gone. No alarms, no doors opened, just an empty bed and a spiral traced in condensation on the window. The same day, more messages came in. Shortwave radio bursts, crackling in patterns that looked like Morse code but translated to nothing. But the sound, like the currents beneath the ice, was everywhere. Ship captains reported sonar ghosts in the silent Atlantic. Shapes huge and slow, moving far below the surface, out of phase with any known current. One British vessel sent a single, final message: "We're drifting, lights beneath." Like stars in a well. That was the last transmission. Back in the ward, Ruth stopped speaking, but the spiral kept growing, now etched into the skin of her arm, scratched with the stub of a hospital pen. Nobody knew how she got it. Doctors tried to bandage it, but every time the gauze came off, the spiral was back, deeper, darker, as if written from the inside. I started to see it everywhere, in the patterns of my coffee, in the way the hospital's drains spun, in the shadows on my eyelids when I blinked too long. One night, I played the survivors' old radio tapes backward, hoping for a clue. Hidden in the static, a single word repeated, over and over, beneath all the rest: stay. That's when the scientists lost their nerve. They pulled funding, ordered the patients moved, demanded we forget the currents and move on to the next emergency. But I couldn't let it go. Something had changed in me. I started dreaming in spirals. Always the same dream, standing on a dead ship, endless blue, the water unmoving, and beneath it, shapes rising, almost human, almost familiar, eyes as old as the sea. And when I woke, I found Ruth staring at me from her bed, mouthing the same word over and over: home, home, home. We thought we'd mapped every inch of this world, but I realized then, we never mapped the places the water doesn't move. We never asked what waits there, watching. That night, the currents began to stir. Just a ripple, but enough for every sensor on the coast to ping at once. But the spiral, in Ruth's skin and on the hospital glass, was already moving, and I knew whatever the ocean kept, whatever it sent back, wasn't finished with us yet. The ripple grew into a wave. Not a wall of water. No, the sea never broke its silence. But something old began to move beneath the Atlantic's skin. Fishermen saw lights below their boats, patterns twisting like northern lights caught under glass. Satellite data spiked. Every monitor at NOAA, at the Navy, at the European weather satellites flashed red. Currents, once flat, now crawling back into motion, but wrong, twisted, spinning in strange loops. That morning, Ruth was gone. Her bed was empty, sheets coiled like a tide had pulled her away. No alarms, no camera footage, just a single spiral traced into the condensation on her window. Outside, the hospitals were filling with confusion. People on every continent reported missing family, wives, sons, brothers, vanishing with only a whisper or a strange saltwater smell. And then came the ships. It was just after dawn when the first one appeared, the Argo Queen, lost months ago, drifting into the fog off Portugal's coast. No radio, no crew on deck, just an empty hull, barnacles layered thick as bone. But inside, they found them, the missing sailors. Dozens, silent, their eyes wide and ancient, their skin dry, their teeth gone, their hair thin as spider silk. Every one of them clutching something, a circle drawn in blood, in dust, in rust on the wall. And when the investigators tried to speak, the crew answered in a chorus, voices cracked but perfectly in sync. We remembered. No one knew what it meant. Not at first, but the same day, in London, Ruth was found, standing on the steps of the Thames, soaked to the bone, eyes staring into the gray dawn. She spoke a single word to the police: home. One by one across the world, survivors returned, on beaches, in rivers, even in dried-up lake beds. Some of them people missing for weeks, some for decades. Their bodies changed by time, but their minds somewhere else. They spoke in riddles, fragments, ancient dialects. They answered questions no one had asked. And always the spiral, on their arms, in their eyes, in the way their footsteps curved on wet sand. I watched Ruth through the hospital glass. She never blinked. Doctors tried to talk, to scan her, to take her blood. She only smiled, a small, knowing smile. The water waited, she said one day. It knew we'd come back. It never forgets. Scientists panicked. Theories exploded. Quantum time slips, oceanic memory, a feedback loop of consciousness. But the currents had restarted, ships could move again. Fishermen braved the sea. But something was different. Some captains reported hearing whispers below deck, voices calling their names. Others claimed to see faces in the wake, hands reaching up from the dark, only to vanish when they blinked. I went back to the Atlantic, to the place where it all began. No one would come with me. I stood on the bow of a research vessel, watching the current swirl. The spiral, larger now, turning just beneath the surface, like a giant eye, always open. I dropped a recorder overboard. I listened to the static, and in the hum I heard them, remember us. Remember what waits when the water stops. We are not lost, we are home. For the first time I understood. The ocean never forgets it's missing. It just keeps them for a while. Ages them, teaches them, then sends them back to remind us of what lies below. Not a warning, a promise. The sea is always listening. And one day, when the currents stop again, it will remember us, too.